Welcome to Afternoon Light, the podcast of the Robert Menzies Institute at the University of Melbourne. I'm Georgina Downer and I'm the host of Afternoon Light and the CEO of the Robert Menzies Institute. The Institute is a prime ministerial library and museum devoted to upholding the legacy and vision of Sir Robert Menzies, Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister. On Afternoon Light, we explore contemporary issues relevant to Sir Robert's life and legacy with leading thinkers from around the world. Thank you for joining us today. Well, welcome. And today we are speaking to David Furse-Roberts about his new book, God and Menzies. And David is a research fellow at the Menzies Research Centre. He holds a PhD in history from the University of New South Wales and has written and edited several books, including Howard, The Art of Persuasion and Menzies' Forgotten People. And I thought it was interesting to start off our discussion, David, by I observed when doing a little bit of research about you that your favourite quote from Menzies was a quote from 1951, and he said, "Democracy is neither accidental nor inevitable. It is the product of generations of self-sacrifice, of conscious struggle, of belief in the vital significance of individual men and women, of a sense of a divine order in a distracted human world." Well, what a way to start a discussion of God and Menzies, David.
Well, thank you, Georgina. And can I first say that it's a great honour to be with you as part of this wonderful new Afternoon Light podcast series. And thank you for having me on this morning. So, yes, with the quote that I chose, I thought that it encapsulated Menzies' worldview. It affirmed his belief in the intrinsic value of every man and woman as people who are precious. And it also underscored his belief in democracy and how democracy is something that has evolved over many hundreds of years through human trial and error and human ingenuity. And it also mentioned divine order, which spoke to Menzies' own belief in God as the creator and the sustainer of the universe, and how God provides a great anchor in a world that is often in turmoil and chaos. And Menzies sees God as this great pillar of stability, a rock amidst the rapids, you could say.
Oh, that's very, very well put. I thought we might start off our discussion by starting off at the beginning of Menzies' life and trying to unpack what it was about Menzies' family that shaped his religious beliefs. He was the son of two Presbyterians, James and Kate Menzies. He grew up, or at least in the very early part of his life, grew up in Western Victoria in a little town called Jeparit. And despite his parents being Presbyterians, there wasn't a Presbyterian church, was there, in Jeparit? So they joined the Methodist Church, of which there was one. And James Menzies was Robert Menzies' father was a devout man and became a lay preacher in that church. But his family life was steeped in Bible reading and was quite I'd say an observant, if not strict, Presbyterian/Methodist family life, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed. So James Menzies, with his wife Kate, settled in Jeparit, as you correctly referred to, and they, of course, imbibed Menzies with the seeds of faith. The staples in their humble home were the Pilgrim's Progress, the authorised version of the Bible, and other sort of Christian books, and the Presbyterian hymnal. And Menzies was sort of introduced to these, and also his grandmother, who was his paternal grandmother, so it was Grandma Menzies, he stayed with sometimes in Ballarat, and she was also a devout Presbyterian. And as punishment, it's believed that she would get her grandson Robert to write out large chunks of the Bible.
Oh, goodness. What did he do to deserve this punishment?
Well, who knows? He was obviously probably very determined and probably very set in his opinions. And I remember reading a little biography of Menzies that said he had an opinion just about everything. And so he might have given her a piece of his mind at times. And so he was punished. And it's believed that that's how he acquired such a high level of biblical literacy from those early days of having to write out scripture.
Well, at least there was a benefit after all that effort. Do you think Menzies was particularly devout as a Christian? I had a discussion the other day, very, very luckily and happily, with Furse-Roberts' daughter, Heather Henderson, and she queried whether he was indeed particularly devout. He certainly was a believer. His childhood was imbued with Presbyterian values and the Christian faith, and obviously Christian scripture through the Bible writing, endless Bible writing and reading. But in terms of his day-to-day life, was that something that you think was a strong feature of it?
Yes, no, that's a great question, because we do wonder what his faith was like in practice. And as you allude to, it was furnished very profoundly with a Christian worldview from the Bible, and he obviously knew his scripture. As to the day-to-day exercise of his faith, I don't think that he was necessarily pious in the sense of being a strictly observant Christian in everyday life, in terms of saying grace before meals or having times of prayer and family devotions. But I do know that he was a regular Bible reader. That was something that he developed, first of all, in his childhood from his parents, but it was also reinforced during his university days when he came into contact with an evangelical Anglican preacher by the name of C.H. Nash. He was actually the founder of the Melbourne Bible Institute, and it was through him that he was impressed with the importance of regularly reading the Bible, because C.H. Nash said to him famously that the Bible contains everything I need to know about Christ and his plan for me. And in fact, when Menzies crossed paths with Nash many years later, I think when he was Prime Minister, he actually recalled those words that Nash said to him in his youth. So he was a regular Bible reader. He knew Scripture thoroughly, and his speeches were just peppered with biblical aphorisms and metaphors and turns of phrase. But his church-going, I think, was sporadic at times. He went regularly, of course, as a child growing up in Jeparit, but when he sort of relocated to Melbourne to undertake his university studies and then to go to the bar, his church-going very much ebbed and flowed as his career took hold and as he started raising his family. They did occasionally attend a church, I think it might have been in West Hawthorn, a Presbyterian church, but whether he went every Sunday is uncertain. And so it's true that his church-going was a bit spasmodic at times, but I believe that his faith remained a constant. And the other thing to note about Menzies' early life is that when he went to Melbourne University, I think it was in 1913, to study law, he became involved in a group called the Melbourne University Student Christian Union. And this was founded as a sort of mainline Protestant student group that attracted people from all Protestant denominations. And Menzies was involved to the extent that he actually served as president of the Melbourne University Christian Union in 1916. And so what was distinctive about this Christian group was that it taught students the Bible and about the gospel of Jesus, but it also impressed upon them the importance of contributing to public life, bringing Christian values to bear into the public sphere, and contributing to the common good of the nation and serving the community. And I think they were ideals that stayed with Menzies for life.
Yeah, well, he was incredibly active at Melbourne University as a student there, wasn't he, as well, being president of the Student Union and an editor of the Melbourne University magazine. So all those aspects of his student life would have prepared him well for a life in public office. I wanted to ask you about then how his Christian faith shaped his understanding of freedom. He seems to have been very much concerned with the spirit of the word rather than the letter of the word in the Bible, and has a concept of freedom that talks to responsibility and duty, which I think comes out of a strong Christian faith and foundation. But how do you see it, David, in the influence of Menzies' Christian faith on his concept of freedom, which was so very essential to, of course, his overarching political philosophy?
Yes. Well, I think that there was an interplay of two sort of currents, a political and a religious or theological one. And taking the political one first, Menzies was very much steeped in the old British Whig liberalism, which could be traced right back to the 17th century liberal philosopher John Locke, who spoke about social contract theory and the rights and obligations of individuals in society. But importantly, Locke also spoke of religious toleration. And there we see the roots sort of that liberal tradition of religious freedom, according religious freedom to everybody of every faith. Locke in his time didn't extend religious freedom to necessarily every faith, but it was a principle that evolved over time and was developed. And anyhow, this Whig liberal tradition later on was championed by the likes of Edmund Burke, the great 18th century Anglo-Irish statesman, and also Thomas Babington Macaulay, the famous 19th century Whig historian, and also the great liberal British Prime Minister William Gladstone, who served as Prime Minister multiple times in the 19th century. And this liberal tradition, I guess, for Menzies gave him a strong ideal of human freedom. This liberal tradition was infused with strongly Christian values and ideals, and this was especially evident in its commitment to humane social reform, with its support for the Factory Acts and other ameliorative measures that helped the poor and improved the living standards of people and gave them greater dignity and personal freedom. So there was that liberal tradition that was infused with Christian principles. Now, turning now to the religious spiritual limb, I think that Menzies' freedom was also steeped in a lot of Methodist thinking as well. Even though Menzies identified as a Presbyterian, he was shaped, I believe, profoundly by Methodism, and he esteemed John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, as one of the immortals of the 18th century. And he credited Menzies for breathing life into the Church of England in the 18th century. It was Wesley's theology of free will that Menzies probably found very attractive. So in contrast perhaps to the more Calvinist streams of Protestantism, Wesley preached a theology of free will that emphasised the freedom for people to either follow God or reject God. And this was a freedom that God gave humanity to either follow him or ignore him. And Menzies believed that freedom as such was a divine gift from God the Creator. And the other important idea of Methodism that Menzies imbibed was this notion of human progress under God, that human beings could become more and more like God or more and more like Christ, and that's something that Christians refer to as holiness. And so Menzies believed that we could, both individually and collectively, progress by following God and Christ in the Bible. We could progress and we could become better people. And as a result, we could build a better society and a better civilization, and one that would be freer and freer. And that's what Menzies imbibed from the Wesleyan tradition of Methodism.
And of course, picking up on that, David, Robert Menzies attended a Methodist school in Wesley, the school in Melbourne, in his high school years on a scholarship because of his academic hard work and brilliance, but he was a particularly hard worker. So that type of influence too would have been strong on him through his formative years. I wanted to talk to you about Menzies' Forgotten People speeches, the broadcasts he made in 1942 and 43 when he was in the political wilderness. After failing as Prime Minister the first time, he spent some time thinking through what his political philosophy actually was. And, of course, these Forgotten People broadcasts formed the foundation of his new Liberal Party's political philosophy and ideology. And of course the manifesto they would take to the 46 and then 49 election, 49 being a successful one for them. But in the Forgotten People speeches, there are some definite turns of phrase that speak to his Christian faith and his Bible reading and learnings. He speaks of home spiritual when he's talking about the different aspects of an individual's life. He certainly places a lot of emphasis on these sort of middle-class Protestant social values, personal integrity, thrift, industry, domestic propriety, and community service. How do you see his Christian faith influencing this Forgotten People ideology, for want of a better turn of phrase?
Yes, well, I think it had a profound influence, as you rightly appreciate, and it was particularly evident, I think, in two of his speeches that were part of that 27 speech series, which became known as the Forgotten People and Other Studies in Democracy. And so in one of his speeches, he talked about the nature of democracy. And a famous line from that speech was that he said, democracy is not a machine, it is a spirit, and it is based on the Christian conception that every human being is equal in the sight of God. And so that spoke to what Christians call the Imago Dei, I guess, meaning image of God. So we're all created in God's likeness and image, and there's an equality, there's an implied equality that because we are all created in God, we're all equal before God, whatever our race or our gender or our station in life, we are all equal before God. And that was a bedrock doctrine of Menzies' worldview. And in that speech on the nature of democracy, he also spoke about the need for citizens to not only care about their own rights, but also about their responsibilities and their obligations to others. And he said that in the wise language of the Bible, being a good citizen is about preferring others to ourselves. And so that was his Christian worldview coming through when he spoke about the nature of democracy, and then turning to, of course, his most famous speech in that series called The Forgotten People, which was delivered on the 27th of May, 1942. And that also was infused with Christian values. He spoke about thrift and personal responsibility, and also the idea of contributing to society, not just being takers, but also givers, not just leaners, but also lifters, people who can contribute to society and make a positive difference. And that was shaped very much by traditional Protestant values that were informed by Calvinism. And also there was much in that speech that would have resonated with other Christian traditions, including Catholicism, where he affirmed the importance of family and of home life and of dependence upon God. And his famous line from this speech was that human nature is at its greatest when it combines dependence upon God with the independence of man. And so these speeches, as well as articulating his liberal philosophy, very much channel Christian thought, stretching back many centuries, back to biblical times.
Thank you, David. I wanted to pick up on a point you made about his Forgotten People speeches, speaking to not just Protestant Christians but Catholic Christians as well, because a real feature of the Menzies era was his particular anti-sectarianism. So in the early, I'd say the sort of the first half, even beyond of Australian Federation, sectarianism was a strong feature of Australian life. There were nasty incidents between Protestants and Catholics, and Menzies, coming from a strong Protestant family, would have potentially fallen quite easily into a sectarian point of view, but he didn't, which was really interesting. He said, "Sectarian strife is the enemy of freedom of worship, not its friend." And in his policies as well, he made sure that he would not have a sectarian worldview, a sectarian policy agenda. Why do you think this was? Was it linked to his views from John Locke of freedom of religion? It certainly wasn't something that he had been taught. There's an incident where he attends I think it's a Catholic event in his electorate in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne in the 1930s, and his family is appalled that he has attended this Catholic event, and they criticise him for it, and he rebukes them and is quite clear that he's attending because he's the member of that area, the local representative, and he should represent all people, irrespective of whether they're Protestants or Catholics or not a Christian at all. And it's quite a progressive, quite a liberal point of view, and quite different for someone of his generation and his upbringing, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. So, yes, again, you rightly touch on many of the factors that may have contributed to his broad anti-sectarian worldview. Yeah, I think there are a couple of important things. First of all, in Japarat, where he grew up, the denominational barriers, I think, were rather fluid. Just the fact that Menzies' father could switch from a Presbyterian to a Methodist church. And so the traditional denominational walls, if you like, were not as pronounced as they may have been in other parts of Australia. And also going to Melbourne University, the Melbourne University Student Christian Union was very broad and ecumenical in outlook. True, it was largely a Protestant movement, but it would have fostered a more open attitude to other Christian traditions like Catholicism and Orthodoxy and so on. And yes, also his liberal worldview, of course, would have contributed to his outlook of religious toleration, going right back, of course, to John Locke. But also in colonial Australia, I find that Menzies reminded me very much of an earlier great Australian liberal of colonial New South Wales, and that was Governor Richard Bourke, who served as Governor of New South Wales during the 1830s and 1820s. And Richard Bourke was a sort of Whig liberal. He was actually related to Edmund Burke as well.
Oh, really? Oh.
And yeah, their names had slightly different spellings. He was a Burke with an O, but he was apparently a distant cousin of Edmund Burke's. They had that common Irish ancestry. And so Richard Bourke in colonial New South Wales, which was also racked by sectarian tensions and divisions, adopted a sort of broad toleration of different Christian denominations. And there were, of course, squabbles over funding for church schools and other institutions between Catholics and the Protestant denominations. And so Burke passed what was called the Church Act to put all Christian denominations on an equal footing. And he believed essentially that Catholics and Protestants were different branches, but of the same Christian trunk with its root in Jesus Christ. And so he had that broad Christian outlook, which Menzies similarly had as a 20th century liberal who was very much in the footsteps of Richard Bourke.
And David, I want to pick up on that tradition then of someone who has anti-sectarian views, then implementing public policy that reflects that anti-sectarianism. One of the last decisions that Menzies made, but lasting in its huge legacy, in 1964, so 2 years before his retirement, he made a decision that the Commonwealth government would fund non-government schools, and it was called State Aid for Schools. It was quite a revolution in the change of the funding mix for school education in Australia. Up until then, schools had been funded by the state governments, and then if they were non-government schools, they'd been funded by the particular churches or private enterprises, private citizens who wanted to support an independent school. So this was now the federal government stepping in to support the non-government school sector, and this was particularly important for the Catholic systemic education system, where I guess it was with the baby boom of the 50s, you had an enormous amount of young children being born and needing to be educated, and the Catholic schools, as with the state schools as well, but the Catholic schools were overflowing and their facilities were in disrepair. There's some extraordinary anecdote in the Menzies, the Howard on Menzies documentary, where John Howard goes and visits a school in, I think it was in Ballarat, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And there was an incident over this particular Catholic school, the toilet block being in complete disrepair. The Catholic. It was a Goulburn. Oh, thank you. They basically the school administration decided the school could no longer function, and so the Catholic kids were then sent to the state schools and weren't treated very well, I must say, according to the interview with one of the former students. So this is a revolution in the way the non-government sector's funded. The Catholic schools are funded. They're going to be funded appropriately and with the support of the Commonwealth government. That was because partly Menzies valued the freedom of parents to choose the education of their kids, but the freedom of Catholic parents to choose, the freedom of Protestant parents to choose, the freedom of atheist parents to choose where their kids would go to school. Yes,
of course. And Menzies was very far-sighted. As early as the 1940s, he had sort of intimated his support for some kind of state aid whereby the parents of pupils going to independent schools would be duly supported, because he understood that such parents contributed taxes to the funding of the public schools. But in return, the private schools that they sent their children to got no government support or funding whatsoever. And so he recognised that this was a very poor return for the parents of independent schools, especially the large numbers of those pupils and families in Catholic schools. And so this was an injustice and an anomaly he was determined to remedy, and eventually he did in 1964. And he believed that it was just a matter of justice for these independent schools that the families had put so much into in terms of support with school fees and other fundraising, that they should be supported by government taxes that they themselves have contributed to in their capacity as taxpayers. And so it was the remedying of a long-standing injustice, as John Howard rightly appreciated when he spoke of Menzies' decision to grant state aid in 1964.
And David, moving away from Christianity, but still, of course, on the topic of God and Menzies, what about the Jewish community in Australia and Menzies' relationship with it, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney, but particularly in Melbourne, where Menzies was from? There was a significant Jewish community, and he was quite a welcome guest at many cultural and community events with the Jewish community. He was a good friend of the Jewish community and a friend of course, Israel, most important for the Jewish community. How did that relationship develop and manifest?
Yes, well, Menzies, of course, esteemed the Old Testament roots of Christianity, and so he had this excellent rapport with Australia's Jewish community, as he really valued the Jewish tradition and its remarkable contribution to both Australia and the Western world. And as you touched on, Menzies would have had early interactions with Jews who were already a visible presence in Melbourne and Victoria, really from the 19th century. And when Menzies attended even Wesley College, there would have been Jewish students there, and certainly at the University of Melbourne. And also as he moved into the legal fraternity during his years at the Melbourne Bar, he would have crossed paths with many Jews who were active in the legal profession. And indeed, that was where he forged one of his closest relationships with a young Jewish barrister called Maurice Ashkenazi, whom he mentored at the bar. So Maurice Ashkenazi read in Menzies' chambers when Maurice Ashkenazi himself was studying to become a barrister. And so he had that mentorship from Menzies, and Menzies maintained a lifelong friendship with Ashkenazi. And when Menzies saw Ashkenazi succeed in his own right, he remarked that the apple did not fall far from the tree.
Well,
and yes, and Menzies also enjoyed close relationships with other key figures, including Sir Israel Brodie and Rabbi Sanger as well, who were prominent leaders in the Melbourne Jewish community. And he also knew Justice Isaac Isaacs, who served on the High Court and was eventually appointed as Australia's first Jewish and Australia's first Australian-born Governor-General in 1930. And Menzies, of course, was a very strong supporter of the establishment of Israel, which had been established in 1947 with the support of the then chiefly Labor government and Doc Evatt, the External Affairs Minister. And Menzies, of course, gave the recognition and the establishment of Israel full bipartisan support. And he praised the creation of Israel really as almost a gesture of world repentance for the appalling mistreatment of Jews through the Holocaust and of the Second World War, and also through previous centuries as well. And so he saw this as a wonderful new chapter for the Jewish people of the world. And he also was a strong opponent of anti-Semitism. He stood strongly with the Jews against anti-Semitic attacks, and he constantly affirmed that Jews were good citizens of Australia. And in his support for Australia's post-war immigration scheme, he welcomed many new Jewish immigrants from post-war Europe, especially from Poland and Hungary and Austria and other areas that had been war-torn from Nazi occupation. And he really welcomed them as valuable new citizens. And he, of course, also esteemed the great Jewish festivals of Rosh Hashanah and Jewish New Year and the great themes of atonement and forgiveness that he also saw as integral to Christianity. And he admired the Jewish community for its sense of family and kinship, of responsibility to one another, and of its great contribution to Australia in all fields of endeavour and in public and professional life generally.
Yes, and I guess given his extensive reading of the Bible in his formative years, that sense of shared heritage between Christianity and Judaism would have been very strong for him from the Old Testament readings. I wanted to go to the completely other side of God and Menzies, and that was of ideologies without God, without religion, and in particular communism, and ask you how Menzies' Christian faith and his belief in that Christian faith as defining a society and a democratic society, giving that defined order in a distracted world, as he said, how he then construed communism, which of course preached a materialist society, one without God, ultra secular. I mean, he was an avowed enemy of communism. He tried to ban the party in 1950. When he failed to do that because the High Court had overturned that, he then tried to change the constitution through a referendum in order to give the Commonwealth power to ban the Communist Party. Again, that failed. The Australian people decided not to change the constitution on that occasion, as they have done on most occasions when it comes to changing the constitution. He didn't like communism for many reasons, but this materialist aspect of communism must have really jarred with him. He rejected that, didn't he, David?
Yes, he did. I mean, the first thing to say is, well, what was Menzies' views of people that were non-believers? And the first thing to establish is that he fully accepted their full rights in civil society. He famously said in his speech on freedom of religion that there are many great and noble people that have been unable to find a God. Are we to deny their place in society? Of which his answer would be an emphatic no. And he therefore believed that agnostics, atheists, naturalistic skeptics, whoever did not follow the Christian God or any other deity, should be fully respected as citizens and had there was accommodation for them in civil society as there was for everybody else. Now, personally, he found atheism, of course, to be a disagreeable philosophy. He regarded it as a gloomy sort of worldview that had no understanding of God and his love for humanity through Christ. So Menzies therefore opposed communism on spiritual grounds as well as on political, economic and national security grounds as well. And what he objected to strongly in communism was its belief in dialectical materialism, which really he saw as negating the essential spiritual dimension to human beings that he believed was taught by the Bible and by great Christian thinkers, including Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and John Calvin. And so communism was intrinsically at odds with the Christian worldview. And he also recognized that where communism had taken root, especially in Soviet Russia, that it had led to the mass persecution of Christians and Jews and Muslims and others of religious faith. And so communism, of course, for him was the enemy of religious freedom. And he recognized, of course, that communist moral principles were antithetical to the Christian values of marriage and family and the sanctity of human life and the importance of the individual, because communism emphasized collectivism and the state, and that was to the detriment of our basic human dignity and our individual self-worth.
And I guess in the end, that was the essence of it, that Menzies' brand of Christianity, his belief system, his political philosophy were founded in the inherent dignity of the individual and the individual's efforts to progress him or herself through life, and that was an anathema to the communist ideology and, of course, to Menzies' worldview. David, author of God and Menzies, thank you so much for joining us today on Afternoon Light. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and understand more deeply Menzies' Christian faith, the influence that had on his political thinkings and his policy decisions too, that legacy of which we still feel today. So thank you very much, David Furse-Roberts. It's been great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much, Georgina. It's been a delight to be with you today, and I just want to commend you for this outstanding Afternoon Light podcast series with the Robert Menzies Institute, and I wish it every success.
Thank you. The Afternoon Light podcast is brought to you by the Robert Menzies Institute at the University of Melbourne. You can find more about the Institute and our podcast at robertmenziesinstitute.org.au. We're also on Twitter, on Facebook and LinkedIn. We look forward to you joining our show next week. Thank you.